England, 1852. In the glittering ballrooms of London, one rule governed all. A woman did not refuse a duke. Yet Emily Winters did exactly that. She was brilliant, guarded, carrying her late father's legacy in a world that refused to acknowledge her capabilities. Jonathan Ashworth, Duke of Rothshire, was charming, untouchable, perfecting the art of emotional distance for years. When their eyes met across a crowded ballroom, neither imagined how a single word, no, would change everything. This is a story of two people learning that true strength lies not in standing alone, but in having the courage to let someone stand beside you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse what everyone expects. And sometimes that refusal is the beginning of everything you never knew you needed. The ballroom at Ashford Manor blazed with 1,000 candles, their golden light dancing across silk gowns and glittering jewels. Jonathan Ashworth, Duke of Rothshire, stood near the marble columns with the practiced ease of a man who had long ago mastered the art of appearing interested while feeling profoundly bored. At 34, he knew every move in this elaborate social ballet, the calculated glances, the practiced blushes, the mothers positioning their daughters like chess pieces across the polished floor. He had played this game for too many seasons. Each ball felt like a repetition of the last, the same conversations wrapped in different ribbons, the same ambitions hidden behind different fans. Jonathan moved through the crowd with effortless grace, fully aware of the whispers that followed in his wake. The Duke of Rothshire was expected to marry soon, expected to choose from among the eager debutantes who seemed to multiply each season like particularly determined flowers. But tonight, something caught his attention. She stood apart from the swirling dancers, positioned near the grand window, as if she wished the glass could swallow her whole. Her dress was the color of twilight, a deep charcoal gray that marked her as a woman in mourning, though clearly the heaviest period had passed. While every other lady wore pastels and pearls, she had chosen simplicity. Her auburn hair was pulled back without ornament, and a single cameo brooch rested at her throat. Two younger women, sisters he guessed from their similar features, stood beside her, their faces bright with excitement. But the woman in grey remained still, her expression distant, as though she occupied a different world entirely from the glittering spectacle around her. Jonathan found himself crossing the ballroom before he'd consciously decided to move. She noticed his approach, her dark eyes lifting to meet his. They were remarkable eyes, intelligent, guarded, shadowed by something deeper than simple grief. She straightened her spine, and he saw her fingers tighten almost imperceptibly around the fan at her side. "My lady," Jonathan began, offering his most polished bow, "I would be honored if you would grant me this dance." The request was perfectly proper. His tone was flawless. He expected the usual response, the flutter of pleasure, the demure acceptance, perhaps a practiced show of modesty before inevitable agreement. Instead, she met his gaze directly. "No, choose another. I thank you, Your Grace, but I must decline." The words fell into the space between them like stones into still water. Around them, conversations faltered. Fans paused mid-flutter. To refuse the Duke of Rothshire, and with such calm certainty, was nearly scandalous. Jonathan felt something shift in his chest, something he couldn't quite name. Surprise, certainly, but also interest. Real interest, sharp and unexpected. "May I ask why?" he asked quietly, stepping closer so only she could hear. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Not fear, not coyness, but a kind of weary honesty that struck him as painfully genuine. "Because I am in mourning, Your Grace," she said softly. "Though I must accompany my sisters tonight, some things matter more than a waltz." She offered a perfect curtsy, the kind that acknowledged his rank while simultaneously dismissing him, then turned back toward her sisters. Within moments, she had melted into the crowd, leaving Jonathan standing alone on the edge of the dance floor. He should have walked away, should have found another partner, let the moment dissolve into the evening's rhythm. But her gaze, steady and unafraid, free of either fear or artifice, had lodged itself somewhere in his mind like a splinter. "Good God, Rothshire!" Lord William Hartley appeared at his elbow, barely containing his amusement. "Did that woman just refuse you?" Jonathan didn't answer. His eyes tracked the woman in grey as she spoke quietly with her sisters, her posture perfect, her expression serene. But he had seen the slight tremor in her hands, the quick breath she'd taken before speaking. "Who is she?" he asked. "That would be Miss Emily Winters," Hartley said, following his gaze. "Eldest daughter of Thomas Winters, the railway magnate who died last spring. Considerable fortune tied up in steel and transport. 2 younger sisters under her care, no brothers. Word is she's been managing the family affairs with their solicitor, though of course she has no legal authority herself." Jonathan absorbed this information silently. A woman accustomed to responsibility then. A woman who understood the weight of duty, who had learned to carry burdens society insisted she was too delicate to bear. "She doesn't look like she needs rescuing," he observed. "No," Hartley agreed, his tone thoughtful. "She looks like she might be doing the rescuing herself." Hours later, in the silence of his study at Rothshire House, Jonathan poured himself a brandy and settled into the leather chair by the fireplace. The evening had continued as such evenings always did. He had danced with Lady Pemberton's daughter, conversed with the Duchess of Somerset, played his part with the expertise of long practice. But his mind kept returning to those dark eyes and that quiet refusal. Some things matter more than a waltz. The words echoed with a dignity that unsettled him. She hadn't been playing a game, hadn't been angling for attention through calculated resistance. She had simply been honest, and that honesty had cut through the performance of the ballroom like a blade through silk. Jonathan stared into the amber liquid in his glass. He couldn't remember the last time someone had surprised him, couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this peculiar mixture of frustration and fascination. For more than a decade, he had moved through society with the bored certainty of a man who knew exactly what to expect. Women wanted his title, his fortune, his attention. The game was always the same, only the players changed. But Emily Winters had looked at him, truly looked at him, and found him wanting, or rather, found his approach wanting. The distinction mattered, though he couldn't yet say why. He thought of what Hartley had mentioned, a woman managing family business through a solicitor, navigating the impossible position of having responsibility without authority. It was the curse of intelligent women in their world, capable of understanding, forbidden from acting, trusted to carry burdens, denied the power to set them down, because some things matter more. Jonathan leaned back, feeling something dangerous take root in his chest. It wasn't wounded pride, though that would have been simpler. It was something more complex, a genuine desire to understand the woman who had said no to him, not to conquer or possess, but to comprehend. To know the mind behind those watchful eyes, to understand what shaped a woman who could refuse a duke with such quiet strength. The fire crackled softly in the grate. London slept beyond his windows, unaware that something had shifted in the carefully ordered life of the Duke of Rothshire. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Jonathan Ashworth wanted something he couldn't simply command or charm into existence. He wanted to be worthy of a different answer. He wanted to understand why this woman, this Emily Winters, had looked at his practiced smile and chosen honesty over opportunity. And he knew, with a clarity that was both exhilarating and unsettling, that he would not forget her any time soon. The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of the Winters' residence in Belgravia, casting pale gold across the mahogany desk where Emily sat surrounded by ledgers and correspondence. She had been awake since dawn, a habit formed during her father's final illness, when the hours before sunrise belonged only to her and the weight of responsibilities no one else could see. Her fingers traced the columns of figures Mr. Cornelius Blackwood had delivered the previous week. The solicitor had arranged everything with meticulous precision, investments, properties, quarterly dividends, all perfectly legal, all completely beyond her control. Her father had built an empire of steel and railways, had taught her to read balance sheets before she could properly read poetry, had trusted her with his vision even as society insisted she was incapable of such understanding. Now he was gone, and that vision lived only in her mind, acknowledged in private conversations with Blackwood, dismissed in every legal document that mattered. "You understand, Miss Winters," the solicitor had said just last month, his tone apologetic but firm. "The law requires a male guardian for such significant decisions. I value your insights tremendously, but my duty is to protect your interests, not to defer to them." The memory stung like salt in an open wound. Emily closed the ledger more forcefully than intended, the sound sharp in the quiet study. "Libby?" She turned to find her sister Charlotte in the doorway, still in her dressing gown, auburn curls tumbling loose around her shoulders. At 22, Charlotte retained the kind of optimism Emily sometimes envied, the belief that the world might yet prove kinder than experience suggested. "You're brooding again," Charlotte observed, crossing the room to perch on the edge of the desk. "I can tell by the way you attack those poor ledgers." "I'm not brooding. I'm calculating." "You're doing both." Charlotte's smile was gentle. "And I suspect last night's ball has something to do with it." Emily felt heat creep up her neck. The ball was perfectly pleasant. "Pleasant enough that you refused the Duke of Rothshire in front of half of London?" Charlotte's eyes sparkled with barely contained excitement. "Libby, do you know what the other ladies were saying? You're either impossibly brave or impossibly foolish, and no one can quite decide which." "I was neither. I was honest." Emily stood and moved to the window, looking out over the garden where their father had once walked with her, explaining the mechanics of railway expansion while her governess despaired of ever teaching her proper watercolors. "I'm in mourning, Charlotte. Dancing felt wrong. That's not the whole truth, is it?" Emily's hands tightened on the windowsill. No, it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that she had looked into the Duke of Rothshire's amber eyes and seen exactly what she expected. A bored aristocrat seeking diversion, a man accustomed to having every whim satisfied with a smile and a curtsy. She had no patience for such games, not when her nights were spent fighting to maintain control of her father's legacy, not when every morning brought new reminders that intelligence without authority was merely decoration. "He's handsome," Charlotte continued, undeterred by Emily's silence. "Everyone says so, and wealthy beyond measure. Most women would have fainted from the honor of his attention. Then most women are welcome to him." Emily turned from the window, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I have more important concerns than charming dukes and their elaborate courtship rituals." The words came out sharper than she intended. Charlotte's expression softened with understanding, the kind that came from sharing grief, from watching their sister Beatrice cry herself to sleep those first months after their father's death, from holding each other when the weight of responsibility threatened to crush them all. "You're allowed to want something for yourself, you know," Charlotte said quietly. "Papa wouldn't have wanted you to spend your whole life carrying burdens alone." Before Emily could respond, their youngest sister Beatrice burst through the door, cheeks flushed with excitement, a cream-colored envelope clutched in her hand. "Look!" At 19, Beatrice still possessed an unguarded enthusiasm that made Emily's heart ache with protective tenderness. "An invitation from Lady Pemberton for tea next week. She says the Duke of Rothshire might attend, and—" She stopped, catching sight of Emily's expression. "Oh, should I not have mentioned him?" "You may mention whomever you like," Emily said, managing a smile, "though I suspect His Grace has far more interesting places to be than Lady Pemberton's drawing room." "Actually," Charlotte interjected, her tone carefully casual, "Margaret Hartley told me the Duke rarely attends afternoon teas. He finds them tedious. So if he does appear—" She let the implication hang in the air. Emily refused to acknowledge the small flutter in her chest. She had refused him once. There was no reason to imagine he would pursue the matter. Men like Jonathan Ashworth didn't chase women who denied them. They simply turned their considerable charm toward easier conquests. And yet, she couldn't quite forget the moment when his polished smile had faltered, when something genuine had flickered across his features. Surprise, yes, but also something deeper, as if she had cracked through a carefully maintained facade and glimpsed the man beneath. "I need to review these contracts before Blackwood arrives this afternoon," Emily said, returning to her desk with deliberate purpose. "Papa's railway investments require attention, and the quarterly reports—" "We'll still be there after breakfast," Charlotte interrupted gently. "Come, Mrs. Davies has made your favorite scones, and Beatrice will expire from curiosity if you don't tell us exactly what the Duke said when you refused him." Emily allowed herself to be guided from the study, though her mind remained tangled in numbers and impossible situations. In the breakfast room, sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the silver tea service and the morning's correspondence arranged neatly on the sideboard. As they settled around the table, Beatrice leaned forward with barely contained excitement. Was he terribly disappointed? Did he seem angry? Neither, Emily said, buttering a scone she had no appetite for. He seemed surprised. Well, of course he was surprised, Charlotte laughed. When was the last time anyone told the Duke of Rothshire no? Emily thought of those amber eyes, studying her with sudden intensity, the way his voice had lowered when he asked why she refused. There had been no anger in his expression, no wounded pride, only genuine curiosity, as if she had presented him with a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. He was perfectly gracious, she said finally. I'm certain he's already forgotten the entire encounter. But even as she spoke the words, Emily wondered if they were true, and more troubling still, she wondered why the thought of being forgotten bothered her more than it should. The conversation shifted to Lady Pemberton's invitation, to Beatrice's hopes for the coming season, to the 1,000 small details that filled their days. But Emily's thoughts kept drifting back to that moment on the ballroom floor, to the Duke's steady gaze, to her own racing heart, to the dangerous temptation of imagining what might have happened if she had said yes instead of no. Some things matter more than a waltz, she had told him. And it was true. Her father's legacy mattered. Her sister's futures mattered. The daily battle to maintain dignity and purpose in a world determined to reduce her to ornamental uselessness, that mattered. But as morning light filled the breakfast room and her sister's laughter echoed off the walls, Emily couldn't quite silence the small, rebellious voice that whispered, what if she deserved to want something for herself? What if refusing the Duke had been not wisdom but fear? She pushed the thought away and focused on her tea, on the familiar comfort of her sister's presence, on the safe, predictable rhythm of days built around duty rather than desire. It was safer that way, simpler. And if a part of her wondered what might have happened if she'd let herself be led onto that dance floor, well, that was a question she had no intention of exploring. Jonathan Ashworth had not attended an afternoon tea in over 3 years. The last one had been a suffocating affair at the Duchess of Somerset's townhouse, where he'd spent 2 hours trapped in conversations about wallpaper patterns and the scandalous length of Miss Hamilton's hemline. He had vowed then never to subject himself to such torture again. Yet here he stood, in Lady Pemberton's over-decorated drawing room, holding a teacup he had no intention of drinking from, scanning the crowd with what he hoped passed for casual interest. Rothshire, Lord William Hartley appeared at his elbow, amusement dancing in his eyes. I never thought I'd see the day you voluntarily attended one of Constance Pemberton's gatherings. What extraordinary motivation could possibly have drawn you here? Jonathan kept his expression neutral, though he was acutely aware of the moment the Winters sisters entered the room. Emily came last, moving with that same quiet grace he remembered from the ball. Today she wore a dress of soft dove grey, still mourning but lighter than before. The colour brought out the warmth in her auburn hair, which was arranged simply but elegantly at the nape of her neck. Social duty, Jonathan replied smoothly. Even dukes must occasionally pretend to care about society's rituals. Ah, yes, social duty. That explains why you're staring at Miss Winters as though she might vanish if you blink. Jonathan didn't dignify that with a response. Emily was speaking with Lady Pemberton now, her younger sisters flanking her like protective guards. He noticed the way she held herself, spine straight, shoulders back, every inch the proper lady. But there was something in her eyes, a wariness that suggested she was far more aware of the room's attention than she wished to be. She's quite something, isn't she? Hartley continued, his tone more thoughtful now. My sister knows her slightly, says Miss Winters is brilliant with numbers, understands her father's railway business better than most of the men who worked for him. But of course, none of that matters in the eyes of the law. Unfortunate, Jonathan murmured, watching as Emily's lips curved in what appeared to be a polite smile at something Lady Pemberton said. But he could see the tension in her posture, the slight tightening of her fingers around her fan. Unfortunate indeed, though I imagine being refused by her didn't feel particularly fortunate either. Jonathan turned to face his friend directly. William, do you have an actual purpose for this conversation, or are you simply here to annoy me? Both, Hartley grinned. But mostly I'm curious. You never pursue women. They pursue you, and you decide whether or not to be caught. This is different. It was different. Jonathan had spent the past week trying to convince himself otherwise, trying to dismiss Emily Winters as a momentary curiosity. But her face kept appearing in his thoughts at odd moments, during meetings with his steward, while reviewing correspondence in the quiet hours before sleep. That steady gaze, that quiet refusal, the sense that she had seen through every carefully constructed layer he presented to the world and found them all wanting. "Miss Winters," Lady Pemberton's voice carried across the room, "do come and greet the Duke of Rothshire. I believe you made quite an impression at the Ashford ball." Jonathan saw Emily's spine stiffen fractionally. She turned, and their eyes met across the crowded drawing room. For a moment, neither moved. Then, with the kind of composure he was beginning to recognize as her armor, she approached. "Your Grace," she offered a perfect curtsy. "How pleasant to see you again." Her tone was polite, almost cordial. But Jonathan noticed the heightened color in her cheeks, the way her breathing had quickened just slightly. She was not as unaffected as she pretended. "The pleasure is mine, Miss Winters," he bowed. "I trust you're enjoying Lady Pemberton's hospitality." "Very much." A pause, barely perceptible. "Though I confess surprise at finding you here. I was given to understand afternoon teas were not to your taste." So she had been asking about him. The realization sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. "Tastes change," he said quietly, holding her gaze. "Sometimes we discover unexpected interest in things we once dismissed." Color deepened in her cheeks. She understood his meaning perfectly. He could see it in the way her eyes widened fractionally in the quick breath she took. "How adaptable of you, Your Grace." Emily, her sister Charlotte, appeared, her timing either remarkably poor or deliberately strategic. "Lady Pemberton wishes to introduce us to Mrs. Hertford. She's organizing a charity auction for the orphanage." "Of course." Emily's relief was palpable. She started to turn away, then hesitated, glancing back at Jonathan. "Good afternoon, Your Grace." "Miss Winters." He kept his voice low enough that only she could hear his next words. "Might I call on you and your sisters this week? There's a matter I'd like to discuss." He saw the war play across her features, curiosity battling caution, interest fighting with what appeared to be fear. Finally, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Thursday afternoon. 3 o'clock. My sisters will be present, of course." "Of course." Jonathan's smile was genuine this time, unpolished by pretense. "I look forward to it." She curtsied again and left, rejoining her sisters with that same careful grace. But Jonathan caught the moment when Charlotte leaned close and whispered something that made Emily's cheeks flush an even deeper shade of rose. "Well," Hartley said from behind him, "that was fascinating." "Was it?" "Oh, definitely. I haven't seen you look that sincere since— Actually, I'm not certain I've ever seen you look that sincere." Hartley's expression turned more serious. "Be careful, Jonathan. That's not a woman who plays games. If you're pursuing her out of boredom or wounded pride—" "I'm not," Jonathan interrupted, surprised by the firmness in his own voice. "I don't know exactly what I'm doing, but it's not that." For the rest of the afternoon, Jonathan maintained his social obligations with practiced ease, conversing with Lady Pemberton about her charity work, discussing politics with Lord Ashford, playing the role he had perfected over years of similar gatherings. But his attention kept returning to Emily, who moved through the room with quiet efficiency, speaking to everyone with the same polite reserve, never quite allowing her guard to drop. He noticed other things too. The way she guided her youngest sister away from Lord Pemberton's son, whose reputation was questionable at best. The careful attention she paid when Mrs. Hertford discussed the orphanage's needs, asking questions that suggested genuine interest rather than mere politeness. The moment when she stepped away from the crowd and stood by the window, her expression unguarded for just an instant, revealing exhaustion that went deeper than any single afternoon could cause. She was tired, he realized. Bone-tired in the way of someone who carried weight others couldn't see, and suddenly he understood something he hadn't before. Emily Winters wasn't just a woman in mourning. She was a woman holding an entire household together with no authority to do so, fighting daily battles in a war society, insisted she couldn't win. The recognition stirred something protective in his chest, something that went beyond mere attraction. He wanted to help her, wanted to be someone she could lean on, if only she would let down those formidable walls long enough to accept such support. As the afternoon drew to a close and guests began taking their leave, Jonathan found Emily near the entrance hall, helping Beatrice with her shawl. "Until Thursday, Miss Winters," he said quietly. Emily looked up, and for just a moment, her mask slipped. He saw vulnerability there, and hope, and something that looked very much like longing, quickly suppressed. "Thursday," she agreed softly. 3 o'clock. In his carriage on the way back to Rothshire House, Jonathan stared out at the London streets and acknowledged what he had been avoiding all week. Emily Winters had gotten under his skin in a way no woman ever had. Her intelligence intrigued him. Her strength attracted him. But it was her vulnerability, that carefully hidden exhaustion, that glimpse of the woman beneath the armor, that had truly captured him. He had spent years perfecting the art of emotional distance, of maintaining charm without investment. But Emily made him want to be different. She made him want to be real. Thursday couldn't come soon enough. Thursday arrived with unseasonable warmth, spring sun flooding through the windows of the Winters residence. Emily had changed her dress 3 times before finally settling on a simple afternoon gown of pale lavender, light enough to suggest the mourning period was ending, modest enough to maintain propriety. "You're nervous," Charlotte observed from her perch on Emily's bed, watching her sister fuss with her hair for the 3rd time. "I'm not nervous. I'm simply ensuring we present ourselves appropriately." Emily's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted a pin. "The Duke of Rothshire doesn't call on just anyone. We must make a good impression." "We?" Beatrice appeared in the doorway, eyebrows raised. "I think His Grace's interest lies fairly specifically with one member of this household." Heat flooded Emily's cheeks. "Don't be ridiculous. He mentioned a matter to discuss. It's probably about Papa's railway investments." "The Duke has substantial holdings in the northern lines, and Blackwood mentioned potential expansions." "Emily," Charlotte interrupted gently, "when a man looks at a woman the way the Duke looks at you, it's not about railway investments." Emily wanted to argue, but the memory of Jonathan's amber eyes stopped her. The way he had watched her at Lady Pemberton's tea, with an intensity that had made her feel simultaneously exposed and seen. Not as Thomas Winter's capable daughter, not as a woman to be managed and protected, but as someone worthy of genuine attention. It terrified her. 3 o'clock, she said firmly, smoothing her skirts. "We'll receive him properly in the drawing room. Both of you will remain present throughout the visit. No sudden errands or convenient departures." "As if we'd miss this," Beatrice grinned. At precisely 3 o'clock, their butler Matthews announced the Duke's arrival. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs as she rose from the settee, hands clasped to hide their shaking. Jonathan entered with that effortless grace she remembered, but something was different. He seemed less the polished Duke and more simply a man, well-dressed certainly, proper in every respect, but with a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been present at the ball. "Miss Winters, Miss Charlotte, Miss Beatrice," he bowed to each in turn, "thank you for receiving me." "The honor is ours, Your Grace," Emily managed, gesturing to the chair opposite. "Please sit. May we offer you tea?" "Thank you, yes." He settled into the chair with easy confidence, but Emily noticed the way his gaze kept returning to her, as if trying to read something in her expression. Charlotte poured tea with practiced elegance, while Beatrice peppered the Duke with questions about his estates, his travels, anything that came to her enthusiastic mind. Jonathan answered with patience and what appeared to be genuine interest, but Emily felt his attention like a weight, even when he wasn't looking directly at her. "Your father's railway ventures were quite visionary," Jonathan said after a while, turning the conversation with deliberate intent. "I've reviewed the quarterly reports Blackwood sent to the major investors. The analysis of the northern expansion routes was particularly insightful." Emily's pulse quickened. Those analyses had been hers, written late at night in her father's study, every calculation checked and rechecked. But they bore Blackwood's signature, his authority. No one was supposed to know she had written them. "I'm certain Mr. Blackwood is quite thorough," she said carefully. "He is." Jonathan's gaze held hers. "Though I suspect his thoroughness may be informed by consultations with someone who understands the technical aspects even better than he does." The room fell silent. Charlotte and Beatrice exchanged glances. "Your Grace," Emily began, but he raised a hand gently. "I mean no disrespect to Blackwood. He's an excellent solicitor. But those reports show a grasp of engineering logistics and financial projection that goes beyond legal training." He paused. "Your father taught you, didn't he? More than just basic figures. He showed you everything." Emily's throat tightened. No one had acknowledged this truth so directly before. Blackwood danced around it with apologetic platitudes. Their father's business associates pretended not to notice, but here was the Duke of Rothshire, stating it plainly, as if her intelligence were fact rather than scandal. "He did," she said quietly. "He believed capability had nothing to do with gender, but the law disagrees." "The law is a blunt instrument," Jonathan replied, "wielded by men too frightened to imagine a world where women might prove their equals." Beatrice gasped softly. Even Charlotte looked shocked. Such statements bordered on radical. "That's quite a bold position, Your Grace," Emily said, studying him with new wariness. "Some might say dangerously progressive. Some might. I prefer to think of it as simple observation." He leaned forward slightly, his intensity focused entirely on her. "You wrote those analyses, Miss Winters. You understand your father's business better than any man currently managing it on your behalf. And yet you must watch from the sidelines. While others make decisions, you could make better yourself." "It's the way of things," Emily said, though the words tasted bitter. "It doesn't have to be." The statement hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Emily's heart raced. What was he suggesting? That she defy convention? Demand authority she could never legally hold? It was madness. It was impossible. It was exactly what she had dreamed of in her most secret moments. "Your Grace," she managed, "I appreciate your understanding, but I'm not sure what you expect me to do with such sympathy. The law won't change because a duke finds it inconvenient." "No," he agreed, "but perhaps there are ways to work within the law while honoring the truth of your capabilities." Before Emily could ask what he meant, Charlotte cleared her throat delicately. "Perhaps we should discuss the charity auction Lady Pemberton mentioned. I believe you said you were interested in contributing, Your Grace." The subject shifted, and the conversation moved to safer ground. But Emily couldn't focus on talk of charity events and social obligations. Her mind spun with Jonathan's words, with the implications of what he seemed to be offering. Recognition, respect. The possibility that someone with actual power might treat her intelligence as asset rather than aberration. It was more seductive than any physical attraction, more dangerous than any flirtation. After an appropriate interval, Jonathan rose to take his leave. "Thank you for your hospitality," he said, bowing to Charlotte and Beatrice. Then he turned to Emily. "Miss Winters, might I have a word?" Chaperoned, of course. "Perhaps by the window." Emily glanced at her sisters, who nodded encouragement. She crossed to the tall windows overlooking the garden, Jonathan following at a respectful distance. Close enough for private conversation, far enough to maintain propriety. "I meant what I said," he began quietly, "about your abilities, about the injustice of your situation. Many things are unjust, Your Grace. We learn to bear them. You shouldn't have to." His voice dropped lower. "Emily, may I call you Emily when we're speaking privately?" The intimacy of her name on his lips sent warmth flooding through her. "That would be acceptable." "Emily," he repeated, and she heard the smile in his voice. "I know we barely know each other. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'd like to change that. I'd like to know you better. Your mind, your thoughts, not just the polite face you show society." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "You're a duke. You could have any woman in London. Why pursue someone who's made it clear she's not interested in playing society's games?" "Because you're not playing," he said simply. "You're the first honest person I've met in years, Emily, and I find I'm desperately tired of pretense." She turned to look at him fully then, searching his face for signs of deception or manipulation. but his amber eyes were clear, earnest, vulnerable in a way that made her own walls crack dangerously. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "How to let someone close while maintaining the responsibilities I carry. My sisters, my father's legacy." "I'm not asking you to abandon anything," Jonathan interrupted gently. "I'm asking for a chance to prove I see you, Emily. All of you. The brilliant woman who writes those analyses, the devoted sister, the daughter still grieving her father. I want to know every part if you'll let me." Emily's breath caught. No one had ever asked for all of her before. Society wanted her decorative and silent. Blackwood wanted her intelligent but invisible. Her sisters needed her strong and unshakable. But Jonathan was asking for the whole truth, the capable and the vulnerable, the strong and the weary, the parts she showed the world and the parts she kept carefully hidden. "That's terrifying," she whispered. "I know." His smile was soft, understanding. "But perhaps we could be terrified together?" Despite herself, Emily laughed, a small, genuine sound that surprised them both. "That's possibly the strangest proposal I've ever heard." "Not a proposal, not yet." His eyes held hers. "Just an invitation, Emily, to let someone see you, to stop carrying everything alone." She should refuse, should maintain her careful distance, protect herself from the inevitable pain of wanting something she couldn't have. But standing there in the afternoon light, with Jonathan looking at her as if she were something precious and rare, Emily found herself nodding. "Very well," she said softly. "But slowly, Your Grace. I'm not accustomed to trust." "Jonathan," he corrected. "When we're alone like this, I'm Jonathan. And slowly is perfectly acceptable, Emily. We have time." But even as he said it, Emily felt the dangerous pull of something that might demand more than time, something that might require courage she wasn't certain she possessed. The following weeks unfolded with a rhythm Emily had never experienced before. Jonathan called regularly, always properly, always with her sisters present, always maintaining the exact boundaries propriety required. Yet within those boundaries, something remarkable began to grow. He brought books he thought she might enjoy, not romantic poetry, but treatises on engineering and commerce. He asked her opinions on matters of actual substance, railway expansion, factory conditions, the changing landscape of British industry. And most astonishingly, he listened. Not with the patronizing patience men usually showed when women spoke of serious matters, but with genuine attention, often asking follow-up questions that proved he valued her perspective. "You're smiling again," Charlotte observed one morning as Emily read a letter that had arrived with the Morning Post. "That's the third time this week he's written." "He's sharing his thoughts on the proposed Manchester line," Emily said, trying to sound casual, even as warmth spread through her chest. "Jonathan thinks—" She caught herself. "The Duke thinks the current route planning overlooks several key commercial centres." "Jonathan?" Beatrice's eyes danced with mischief. "When did we start using his given name?" "We don't. I misspoke." But Emily couldn't quite hide her smile. The truth was, their conversations had grown increasingly intimate, though never improper. During his visits, they would inevitably drift toward the windows or the far corner of the drawing room, still visible to her sisters, but afforded enough privacy for genuine discourse. And in those moments, Jonathan became not the Duke of Rothshire, but simply a man, thoughtful, curious, surprisingly uncertain at times. "I spent years perfecting a mask," he had told her during his last visit, his voice low and honest. "The charming Duke, who never quite commits to anything real. It was safer that way, emptier but safer." "And now?" Emily had asked. "Now I want something real." His amber eyes had held hers. "With you." The memory made her pulse quicken even now, sitting in the morning room with her sisters. She had never imagined a man like Jonathan, titled wealthy, accustomed to deference, would pursue her with such patient sincerity. Most men wanted ornamental wives, pretty pieces to display at social functions. Jonathan wanted her mind, her honesty, the parts of herself she had learned to hide because they made others uncomfortable. It was intoxicating. It was terrifying. "Emily," Charlotte said gently, pulling her from her thoughts, "may I speak plainly? When have you ever done otherwise?" Charlotte smiled, but her expression grew serious. "I see how you look at him, And I see how he looks at you. This isn't a casual flirtation anymore, is it? Emily set down the letter, her hands suddenly unsteady. I don't know what it is. I know I should be more careful, more guarded. He's a duke, Charlotte. Even if his intentions are genuine, our worlds are so different. Your worlds aren't as different as you think, Beatrice interrupted. He understands duty and responsibility. He knows what it means to carry weight others can't see. That's more common ground than most couples ever find. But what about Papa's business? The investments I've been managing through Blackwood. If I were to... Emily couldn't quite finish the thought. To marry Jonathan would mean surrendering even the invisible control she currently maintained. Wives had no legal standing whatsoever. Everything she was, everything she had worked to preserve, would become his property. Have you asked him about that? Charlotte's question was gentle but pointed. About what would happen to your involvement in the business? Emily shook her head. The question felt too presumptuous, too forward-looking. They had known each other barely a month. Yes, something profound was growing between them, but marriage? That was a leap she couldn't yet contemplate. Still, the question haunted her through the rest of the morning. What would happen if this connection deepened into something more permanent? Would Jonathan truly respect her capabilities, or would he gradually, inevitably, begin to see her as others did, a woman who needed protection from her own intelligence? That afternoon, Jonathan arrived earlier than expected, his expression troubled. "Forgive the intrusion," he said after the usual greetings. "But I've just come from a meeting with several railway investors, including your solicitor Blackwood. There's a matter I thought you should know about immediately." Emily's stomach tightened. What kind of matter? A proposal has been made to merge several of the smaller railway lines, including two your father invested in heavily. The terms are disadvantageous. Blackwood seems inclined to accept, but I suspect he hasn't fully analyzed the long-term implications. What kind of disadvantages? Emily's mind was already racing through possibilities. Jonathan glanced at Charlotte and Beatrice. "It's rather technical, perhaps—" "They can hear this," Emily interrupted. "They're part of this family and they deserve to understand what affects our future." Something shifted in Jonathan's expression, approval, mixed with an emotion Emily couldn't quite name. "Very well. The proposed merger would consolidate ownership but dilute individual voting rights. In the short term, it looks favorable. Better quarterly returns, reduced operational costs. But within 5 years, the major shareholders would effectively control everything, and smaller investors like your family would have no voice in strategic decisions. Which means," Emily said slowly, understanding dawning, "that when those major shareholders decide to prioritize their own interests, cutting unprofitable routes, closing stations in smaller towns, we'd have no ability to object. The very communities Papa wanted to serve would be abandoned." "Exactly." Jonathan's eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I knew you'd see it. Blackwood is an excellent solicitor, but he's thinking like a lawyer, not a strategist. This requires someone who understands both the financial structure and your father's original vision." "Someone like Emily," Charlotte said quietly. "Yes." Jonathan didn't look away from Emily's face. "Someone exactly like Emily." The room fell silent. Emily felt the weight of what he was offering. Not just information, but recognition. He had brought this to her first, not to Blackwood, not to any of the male investors. To her, because he trusted her judgment above all others. "What are you proposing?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Come with me to the next investors' meeting. Not officially, that would be impossible. But Blackwood could bring you as his consultant. Your presence wouldn't be listed in the minutes, but you could present your analysis directly to the key decision-makers." "That's highly irregular," Beatrice breathed. "It's radical," Charlotte added. "It's necessary," Jonathan said firmly. "These men respect power and competence. If Emily can demonstrate both, they'll listen. Not because she's a woman demanding to be heard, but because she's offering insights they need." Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. What Jonathan was suggesting went against every social convention she'd been raised to observe. Women didn't attend business meetings. They didn't speak to rooms full of men about matters of commerce and strategy. Even discussing such things was considered unfeminine. vaguely scandalous. But her father had raised her to think, to analyze, to see opportunities others missed, and Jonathan was offering her the chance to use those skills, not invisibly, through Blackwood's reports, but directly. "When is the meeting?" she asked. Jonathan's smile was slow and warm, filled with undisguised admiration. "Tuesday next, 2 o'clock at the Grosvenor Hotel. I'll arrange everything with Blackwood. You'll need to prepare your analysis." "I already have it," Emily interrupted. "I've been tracking these railways for months. I suspected something like this might be proposed eventually." "Of course you have." Jonathan's laugh was soft, delighted. "Emily Winters, you are extraordinary." Heat flooded her cheeks, but she couldn't suppress her own smile. "I'm simply prepared, Your Grace." "Jonathan," he corrected, "please, your sisters are here. We're discussing matters of genuine import, and I think we're well past the point of such formality." "Jonathan," Emily repeated, tasting his name. It felt dangerous and right all at once. He stayed for another hour, discussing strategy and potential counter-arguments. Charlotte and Beatrice contributed their own observations. Beatrice with surprising insight about how the railway closures would affect the smaller communities they'd visited. Charlotte with practical questions about implementation. Jonathan listened to them all with the same respect he showed Emily, never dismissing their contributions as frivolous or uninformed. When he finally rose to leave, he caught Emily's hand briefly. A touch that lasted only seconds but sent warmth spreading through her entire body. "You'll be brilliant," he said quietly. "But then, I never doubted that." After he left, Emily sank into the nearest chair, her mind spinning with equal parts exhilaration and terror. "Are you really going to do this?" Beatrice asked, her eyes wide. "I have to," Emily said. "This is Papa's legacy. I can't let it be dismantled by men who never understood his vision." "And Jonathan?" Charlotte's question was gentle. "What is he to you now, Emily?" Emily closed her eyes, feeling the truth she'd been avoiding settle over her like a weight and a wings simultaneously. "Everything I never knew I wanted. Everything that terrifies me. He sees me, Charlotte. Not the proper lady or the grieving daughter or the capable, but ultimately powerless woman. He sees all of me and doesn't flinch." "That's love," Beatrice said softly. "Or the beginning of it." Was it? Emily didn't know. She had never expected to fall in love, had resigned herself to a life of useful spinsterhood, managing her sisters' lives and her father's diminishing legacy. But Jonathan had disrupted everything: her carefully maintained walls, her certainty that she was better off alone, her belief that no man would ever truly value her mind as much as her face or fortune. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted. "I don't know if I can be what he needs. A duchess, can you imagine me navigating that world?" "I can imagine you doing anything you set your mind to," Charlotte said firmly. "But Emily, you need to be honest with yourself. If you're falling in love with him, and I think you are, you need to decide if you're brave enough to let yourself have this, not just the business respect or the intellectual partnership. The whole thing, the vulnerability, the risk." Emily thought of Jonathan's amber eyes, the way he looked at her as if she was something precious and rare, the careful way he had pursued her, never pushing, always giving her space to decide what she wanted. The radical proposal he'd just made, risking his own reputation to give her a voice in matters that mattered. "I think," she said slowly, "I might already be too far gone to turn back." Her sisters exchanged knowing smiles, and Emily felt something shift inside her. A wall crumbling, a window opening, letting in light she'd kept carefully shuttered for too long. Tuesday would bring its own challenges. But for now, Emily let herself feel the warmth of possibility, of a future she'd never dared imagine becoming suddenly, terrifyingly real. Before we continue, I want to thank you for being here, for letting these characters and their story into your heart. If you're enjoying Emily and Jonathan's journey, this dance between duty and desire, strength and vulnerability, please consider subscribing to the channel. And here's something I'm curious about. If you could ask Emily one question right now, as she stands on the edge of this new chapter, what would it be? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your insights often illuminate corners of these stories even I hadn't fully seen. The Grosvenor Hotel's private conference room smelled of tobacco, aged leather, and masculine confidence. Emily stood in the doorway, her leather portfolio clutched against her chest like a shield, and felt her courage waver. 12 men sat around the enormous mahogany table, their conversations creating a low rumble of voices. She recognized several: Lord Ashford, whose estates bordered the northern rail lines; Sir Thomas Whitmore, whose shipping interests tied directly to the railways; and of course Mr. Blackwood, her solicitor, who looked simultaneously proud and terrified at what they were about to attempt. Jonathan stood near the windows, and when his eyes found hers, the anxiety pressing against her ribs eased fractionally. He crossed to her immediately, his presence solid and reassuring. "Emily," he said quietly, "you don't have to do this. We can still present your analysis through Blackwood if you prefer." She straightened her spine. "No. If I'm going to save my father's legacy, I need to do it myself." Pride flashed across his features. "Then let me introduce you properly." He guided her into the room with a hand at the small of her back. Respectful, supportive, unmistakably claiming her as someone under his protection. The conversations died as the men noticed her presence. "Gentlemen," Jonathan's voice carried effortless authority, "may I present Miss Emily Winters, eldest daughter of the late Thomas Winters. Some of you knew her father. All of you benefit from his investments. Miss Winters has prepared an analysis of the proposed merger that I believe requires your immediate attention." "Rothshire," Lord Ashford cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Surely this is irregular." "While we mean no disrespect to Miss Winters, business matters are precisely what Miss Winters has been managing for the past 18 months, Jonathan interrupted smoothly. "The quarterly reports you've all been praising, the strategic recommendations that increased returns by 15%. Those came from Miss Winters' mind, though propriety required Mr. Blackwood's signature. The silence that followed was absolute. Emily felt a dozen pairs of eyes assessing her, most with skepticism, some with curiosity, a few with outright hostility. "That's preposterous," Sir Thomas said flatly. "Blackwood, surely you're not claiming—" "I claim only the truth," Blackwood interjected, finding his courage. "Miss Winters possesses a remarkable understanding of railway logistics and financial structures. Her father trained her extensively. I would be a fool not to utilize such an asset, gender notwithstanding." "This is most inappropriate," another investor muttered. "What's inappropriate," Emily said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice, "is dismantling my father's vision without fully understanding what you're destroying." She moved to the head of the table, spreading her documents with hands that barely trembled. Jonathan remained by the door, giving her space but ready to intervene if needed. She felt his presence like an anchor, steadying her. "The proposed merger looks advantageous on paper," she began. "Better quarterly returns, consolidated operations, reduced overhead. But gentlemen, I ask you to look deeper." She produced the first chart, her figures precise and undeniable. "Within 3 years, the major shareholders will control 87% of voting rights. Within 5, they'll begin closing unprofitable routes, specifically these 12 lines serving smaller communities." She pointed to the map she'd prepared. "These aren't just numbers on a ledger. These are towns that depend on railway access for commerce, communication, survival. My father built his business on the principle that progress should serve all communities, not just the most profitable ones." "That's very noble," Lord Ashford said, his tone patronizing. "But business isn't charity, Miss Winters. We have obligations to maximize returns for our investors. And I'm showing you how." Emily pulled out another document, her confidence growing. "If instead of accepting this merger, we form a counter-coalition with 3 smaller lines currently being excluded, we can maintain control while still achieving operational efficiencies. The initial returns will be marginally lower, approximately 3%, but within 7 years, our position will be significantly stronger. Moreover, we'll preserve the routes serving these communities, which will generate long-term loyalty and political capital." She saw the moment calculation replaced skepticism in several faces. These were businessmen, after all. They understood numbers, strategy, long-term positioning. The figures are sound, Sir Thomas admitted grudgingly, reviewing her projections. But forming such a coalition requires coordination, negotiation. It's complex. It is, Emily agreed, which is why it requires someone who understands not just the financial structures, but the original strategic vision, someone who knows what my father intended and has the capability to execute it. Someone like you, Jonathan said from the doorway, his voice carrying both challenge and support. The room erupted in murmurs. Emily's heart hammered, but she held her ground, meeting each skeptical gaze with calm determination. "This is highly irregular," Lord Ashford repeated, though he sounded less certain than before. "So was building a railway empire from nothing," Emily said quietly. "My father did what others thought impossible. I learned from him. The question isn't whether a woman can understand these matters, gentlemen. The question is whether you're wise enough to listen when she does." The silence stretched taut. Then Sir Thomas laughed, a sharp, surprised sound. "By God, Rothschild, she's got spine." He looked at Emily with new respect. "Very well, Miss Winters. I'll review your proposal seriously. No promises, but you've earned that much." One by one, the other investors nodded agreement. Not all of them. 3 left immediately, clearly offended by her presence. But enough stayed, enough listened, enough looked at her documents with genuine consideration rather than dismissal. As the meeting dispersed, Jonathan approached her, his eyes warm with undisguised admiration. "How you were magnificent," he said quietly. Emily's hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "I thought I might be sick halfway through. You never showed it." He glanced around, then lowered his voice further. "Emily, do you understand what you just did? You didn't just present an analysis, you changed minds, made them see you as something other than a decorative afterthought. Because you gave me the opportunity." She met his eyes. "Because you believed I could. I believe many things about you." His gaze intensified. "I believe you're brilliant, I believe you're capable of anything you set your mind to, and I believe—" He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "Come, let me escort you home." The carriage ride back to Belgravia was quiet at first. Emily stared out the window, her mind replaying every moment of the meeting, every small victory and near disaster. "What did you almost say?" she asked finally. "At the hotel. You started to tell me something you believed." Jonathan was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "I believe I'm falling in love with you." Emily's breath caught. She turned to face him, finding his expression open, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "I know it's too soon," he continued. "I know we've known each other barely 2 months. But Emily, I've spent my entire adult life maintaining careful distance from anything real. With you, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. Jonathan, let me finish, please." He leaned forward, his intensity filling the small space between them. "I've watched you carry impossible burdens with grace. I've seen your intelligence, your devotion to your sisters, your determination to honor your father's memory. But more than that, I've seen who you are when you think no one's watching. The woman who sits in her father's study late at night, crying over ledgers because she misses him. The sister who ensures Beatrice and Charlotte have every opportunity she never had. The person who refuses to compromise her principles even when it costs her dearly." Emily felt tears burning behind her eyes. "You see too much." "I see you." He reached across the space between them, his hand finding hers. "And I want to be the man you turn to when carrying everything alone becomes too heavy. I want to be your partner, Emily, in business, in life, in everything. That's what terrifies me." Her voice broke slightly. "What if I let myself need you? What if I let you in and then I prove myself unworthy of your trust?" Jonathan's thumb traced circles on her palm. "That's a fair fear. I've given you no reason to believe I'm different from every other man who promises one thing and delivers another. But Emily, I swear to you, on everything I hold sacred, I see your strength, and it doesn't threaten me, it awes me." The carriage slowed as they approached her house. Time was running out, and Emily felt the moment pressing against her like a physical force. She could retreat now, maintain her careful walls, protect herself from potential heartbreak, or she could take the terrifying step of trusting him. "I'm not ready," she said finally, "not for declarations or promises. But Jonathan, I feel something for you that frightens me precisely because it's so powerful. I need time to take all the time you need." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. "I'm not going anywhere, Emily. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to trust that this is real." The carriage stopped. The footman opened the door, and Emily found herself unable to leave without saying what needed to be said. "Jonathan, I'm grateful, not just for today, but for seeing me, for believing in me when I was struggling to believe in myself." His smile was soft, genuine. That's what people do when they're falling in love, Emily. They see each other clearly and choose to stay anyway. She stepped from the carriage, her heart full and aching simultaneously. As she climbed the steps to her house, she turned back once to find him still watching, his expression holding everything he hadn't said. Inside, Charlotte and Beatrice were waiting in the drawing room, their faces alight with curiosity. "How did it go?" Beatrice asked immediately. Emily sank into a chair, pulling off her gloves with trembling fingers. "They listened. Not all of them, but enough. Sir Thomas actually thanked me for my insights before he left." "That's wonderful," Charlotte exclaimed. "And the Duke? How was he?" Emily closed her eyes, seeing Jonathan's face as he confessed his feelings. The vulnerability in his eyes, the steady certainty in his voice. "He told me he's falling in love with me," she said quietly. The room fell silent. Then Beatrice let out a small squeal of delight, while Charlotte's expression softened with understanding. "And you?" Charlotte asked gently. "How do you feel?" Emily thought of the warmth that spread through her chest whenever Jonathan looked at her, the way her pulse quickened when he entered a room, the safety she felt in his presence, as if for the first time since her father's death, she didn't have to carry everything alone. Terrified, she admitted, and hopeful, and so scared of wanting something this much. "That's love," Charlotte said simply. "It's supposed to be terrifying." Emily thought of her father, of the way he had looked at her mother before illness took her, the tenderness mixed with strength, the partnership that had defined their marriage. She had always wanted something like that, but had convinced herself it was impossible for a woman like her, too intelligent, too independent, too complicated. But Jonathan seemed to value precisely those qualities that others found troublesome. He didn't want to diminish her. He wanted to stand beside her, supporting without smothering, respecting without condescending. "What do I do?" she asked her sisters. "You let yourself feel it," Beatrice said firmly. "You let yourself want him. And when you're ready, when you're truly ready, you tell him you feel the same way." Emily nodded, though uncertainty still coiled in her chest. Falling in love meant vulnerability. It meant trusting someone with the power to destroy her. And after losing her father, after fighting so hard to maintain control in a world determined to take it from her, surrendering that control felt like stepping off a cliff. But perhaps, she thought, remembering the steadiness in Jonathan's eyes, sometimes falling was the only way to learn you could fly. The weeks following the investors' meeting brought changes Emily hadn't anticipated. Word of her presentation spread through certain circles, not widely. Propriety still demanded discretion, but enough that 3 other railway investors requested consultations through Blackwood. Jonathan's influence, she suspected, though he never claimed credit. More significantly, the counter-coalition she'd proposed began to take shape. Sir Thomas proved surprisingly supportive, his initial skepticism transformed into grudging respect. Even Lord Ashford, after reviewing her projections twice, admitted her strategy had merit, but success in business couldn't quiet the turmoil in her heart. Jonathan continued his courtship with patient determination. He called 3 times weekly, always proper, always bringing her sisters small gifts, books for Beatrice, sheet music for Charlotte. But his attention remained focused on Emily, his eyes tracking her movements across rooms, his conversations designed to draw out her thoughts on everything from politics to philosophy. "You're avoiding him," Charlotte observed one morning, as Emily pretended to focus on correspondence. He asked twice yesterday if you'd accompany him to the museum, and you invented excuses both times. I wasn't inventing. I genuinely had appointments with Blackwood. Emily, Charlotte's voice held gentle reproach. You're frightened, and I understand why. But Jonathan isn't going to hurt you. You can't know that, Emily said, setting down her pen with more force than intended. No one can promise that. No, Charlotte agreed, but you can't live your entire life protected behind walls. Eventually you have to risk something. Emily knew her sister was right, but knowing and doing were vastly different things. Every time she saw Jonathan, every time his eyes held hers with that mixture of patience and longing, she felt herself weakening. The walls she'd built so carefully were crumbling, and the prospect of being that vulnerable terrified her. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Lady Pemberton arrived unannounced, her expression unusually serious. "Miss Winters," she said after accepting tea, "I hope you'll forgive my directness, but I feel compelled to speak with you about the Duke of Rothshire." Emily's stomach tightened. "Has something happened?" "Nothing untoward. But Emily, may I call you Emily? I've known Jonathan since he was a boy. His mother and I were dear friends before she passed." Lady Pemberton's eyes were kind but searching. "I've watched him navigate society for years, maintaining perfect courtesy while keeping everyone at arm's length. Until you. I don't understand. He's in love with you. Truly, deeply in love in a way I've never seen him before. And I believe you feel the same, though you're fighting it rather desperately." Heat flooded Emily's cheeks. "Lady Pemberton, I hardly think—" "My dear, I'm not here to scold. I'm here to share something Jonathan would never tell you himself." She paused, choosing her words carefully. His father was a difficult man, cold, controlling, convinced that emotion was weakness. Jonathan learned early to hide his feelings, to present only what was safe and acceptable. It's taken tremendous courage for him to be honest with you. Emily's throat tightened. She had sensed Jonathan's careful control, but hadn't understood its origins. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're also hiding, Emily. Perhaps for different reasons, but with equal determination. And I would hate to see two people who could make each other genuinely happy lose that chance because they're both too frightened to be vulnerable." After Lady Pemberton left, Emily sat in the drawing room, her mind churning. She thought of Jonathan's confessions in the carriage, the way his voice had roughened with emotion, the risk he'd taken in being honest about his feelings when he couldn't be certain she'd reciprocate. And she thought of her own fear, not just of being hurt, but of losing herself, of becoming so intertwined with another person that she forgot how to stand alone. But was that really what Jonathan offered? Or was she projecting old fears onto new circumstances? That evening she wrote him a letter. Her hand trembled as she formed each word. "Jonathan, I've been unfair to you. You've been honest about your feelings while I've hidden behind propriety and caution. The truth is, I'm terrified. Not of you, but of what you make me feel. I've spent so long being strong, being the one everyone depends on, that I've forgotten how to need anyone. But I do need you. I need your steadiness, your faith in me, your willingness to see me completely without flinching. And that need frightens me more than anything else in my life. I'm not ready to say the words you've said to me, but I'm ready to stop running. If you're still willing to be patient, I'd like to try letting you in. Slowly, carefully, but genuinely. Yours, Emily." She sealed it before courage could fail her, and sent it with their footman before she could reconsider. Jonathan's response arrived the next morning. "Emily, your honesty means more than any declaration could. I don't need you to say words you're not ready to say. I need only your willingness to try, which you've given me. Come driving with me this afternoon. Just us, with a proper groom following at a discreet distance. Let me show you something." Jonathan and Emily found herself agreeing before fully considering the implications. At 2 o'clock, Jonathan arrived with an open carriage, the weather mercifully clear and warm. "Where are we going?" she asked as they left Belgravia behind. "Somewhere I haven't shown anyone else," he said, his voice soft. "Somewhere that matters to me." They drove north out of London, following country roads that grew increasingly rural. Finally, Jonathan directed the driver down a narrow lane that opened onto a vista of rolling hills and old oaks. "My mother loved this place," he said quietly, helping Emily down from the carriage. She used to bring me here when I was young, before she died. It was the only place she seemed truly happy. Emily felt the significance of this revelation settle over her like a mantle. Thank you for sharing it with me. They walked in silence for a while, the groom remaining with the carriage to give them privacy while maintaining propriety. Finally, Jonathan stopped beneath a massive oak, its branches spreading like a cathedral ceiling above them. Emily, I need you to understand something. He turned to face her fully, his amber eyes serious. I don't want to change you. I don't want you to become less than you are to fit some ideal of what a duchess should be. I want you exactly as you are, brilliant, stubborn, carrying your father's legacy with more grace than any man I know. But society, she began. Society can adapt or be damned. His voice held steel beneath the gentleness. I have enough influence to protect you from the worst of their censure. And Emily, you're strong enough to weather the rest. We both know that. She looked up at him, seeing past the polished duke to the man beneath. The one who had lost his mother young, who had learned to hide himself for survival, who was risking everything by being honest with her. I'm afraid of losing myself, she whispered, of becoming just the Duke of Rothshire's wife instead of Emily Winters. Then don't. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth. Be Emily Ashworth, Duchess of Rothshire, a woman who happens to understand railway logistics better than most men, who writes brilliant analyses, who refuses to be diminished by outdated laws or tired conventions. Be everything you are, Emily. I'll stand beside you while you do. Something in her chest cracked open, not breaking but blooming, like a flower that had been pressed between pages, suddenly remembering how to unfold toward light. I'm falling in love with you, she heard herself say, the words escaping before caution could stop them. I've been fighting it, but Jonathan, I'm falling, and I don't know how to stop. His smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. Then don't stop. Let yourself fall, Emily. I promise to catch you. He reached up slowly, giving her every opportunity to retreat, and brushed a strand of auburn hair from her face. His fingertips trailed along her jaw, gentle as breath. May I kiss you? He asked, his voice rough with restrained desire. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the moment where walls truly came down, where she stopped hiding behind propriety and fear. She could retreat now, maintain safe distance, or she could take the leap and trust him to catch her. Yes, she whispered. Jonathan's hand cupped her cheek as he leaned down, giving her time to change her mind, to pull away. But Emily didn't move, couldn't move, didn't want to move. Their lips met softly at first, tentative, testing. Then something ignited between them, and the kiss deepened. His other hand found her waist, drawing her closer while maintaining respectful boundaries. Emily's hands rose to his chest, feeling his heartbeat racing as fast as her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jonathan rested his forehead against hers. Emily Winters, he murmured, you are extraordinary. I'm terrified, she admitted. Good. His smile was tender. So am I. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe and alone without you. They stood there beneath the oak tree, wrapped in each other's presence, and Emily felt the last of her defenses crumble. She was falling in love with Jonathan Ashworth, Duke of Rothshire, and for the first time since her father's death she felt truly, completely alive. The engagement announcement appeared in the Times 3 weeks later, causing predictable reactions throughout London society. Some celebrated the match. A duke marrying the daughter of a successful industrialist suggested progressive thinking. Others whispered scandal. A woman known to involve herself in business matters was hardly appropriate duchess material. Emily found she cared less than she'd expected about the whispers. Lady Worthington cut me directly at the modista yesterday, Charlotte reported over breakfast, trying to sound unconcerned. Then Lady Worthington is a fool, Emily replied calmly, buttering her toast, and her opinion matters not at all. Beatrice grinned. Being engaged to a duke has made you remarkably confident. Being engaged to Jonathan has made me realize whose opinions actually matter. Emily met her sister's eyes. We've spent too long trying to satisfy people who will never approve of us, regardless of what we do. I'm done with that. The transformation wasn't merely confidence, though that was part of it. Falling in love with Jonathan had shifted something fundamental in Emily's understanding of herself. She had always believed strength meant independence, that needing anyone was weakness. But Jonathan showed her a different truth, that allowing herself to be vulnerable, to need and be needed, required a courage she'd never imagined. Their courtship deepened with each passing day. Jonathan called daily now, propriety satisfied by short visits in the afternoon. But those brief hours were filled with conversations that ranged from business strategy to philosophy, from shared laughter to comfortable silences that needed no words. He had also made good on his promise. When Lord Ashford questioned Emily's continued involvement in the railway coalition, Jonathan's response had been swift and unequivocal. Miss Winter's insights are invaluable. Any man foolish enough to dismiss her counsel is welcome to remove himself from the venture. No one had removed themselves. The wedding was planned for early autumn, giving them time to navigate the social obligations that came with such a prominent match. But Emily found herself impatient for it to arrive, eager to begin this new chapter of her life. "You're daydreaming again," Jonathan's voice broke through her thoughts. They were in her father's study, now her study, reviewing the latest railway reports. He sat beside her at the desk, close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed, sending small sparks of awareness through her body. "I was thinking about the wedding," she admitted, counting down the days. His eyes held warmth and something deeper, desire carefully restrained by propriety and respect. Perhaps. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Is that terribly forward of me?" "It's honest." Jonathan set down the document he'd been reviewing and turned to face her fully. "Emily, I want you to know something. I've instructed my solicitors to draw up papers that will protect your involvement in your father's businesses after we marry. Legally, everything becomes mine, but I'm establishing a trust that ensures you maintain control in practice, if not in name." Emily's breath caught. "Jonathan, no one does that. No one has a wife like you." His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Your intelligence isn't something to be managed or contained, Emily. It's something to be honored. These papers ensure that even if something happens to me, you'll have the legal protection to continue your father's work." Tears burned behind her eyes. She had known Jonathan respected her capabilities, but this was more than respect. This was genuine partnership, the kind she'd dreamed of but never believed possible. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll let me spend the rest of my life proving I meant every promise I made." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. "Say you'll trust me with your heart, Emily. I swear I'll guard it more carefully than my own." "I already do," she said softly. "Trust you, love you. Both terrify me equally, but I do." Jonathan's smile was radiant. He leaned closer, his free hand cupping her cheek, thumb brushing across her lips with maddening gentleness. "We should maintain propriety," he murmured, though he made no move to pull away. "Your sisters are just down the hall." "We should," Emily agreed, equally motionless. "But God help me, Emily, you make it difficult to remember why propriety matters." "Then perhaps," she whispered, surprising herself with her boldness, "we should consider moving the wedding date forward." Jonathan's eyes darkened with desire, barely restrained. "Are you certain? I don't want you to feel rushed." "I'm certain." Emily held his gaze, letting him see the truth of her words. "I've spent my entire life being cautious, Jonathan, being safe. You make me want to be brave instead." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, his arms pulling her close while maintaining the boundaries propriety demanded. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his voice was rough with emotion. 6 weeks, he said. "I'll speak with the vicar tomorrow. 6 weeks and you'll be my wife." 6 weeks, Emily repeated, the words tasting like promise and possibility. The accelerated timeline sent both households into organized chaos. There were fittings for the wedding gown, meetings with the vicar, endless discussions about guest lists and seating arrangements. Emily navigated it all with Charlotte and Beatrice's help, but her mind kept drifting to what came after, to married life, to sharing a home with Jonathan, to the intimacy that both excited and intimidated her. "You're nervous about the wedding night," Charlotte observed during one particularly quiet evening. Emily felt her cheeks flame. "Charlotte, it's natural to be nervous," her sister continued calmly. "But Emily, Jonathan loves you. He's been nothing but patient and respectful. That won't change." "I know." Emily twisted her hands in her lap. "It's not that I don't want, I do, very much. I just don't know what to expect." Beatrice surprisingly spoke up. "Mama told me before she died that the most important thing is honesty. That loving someone means letting them see all of you, even the parts you usually hide. I think that applies to everything in marriage." Her sister's words stayed with Emily through the remaining weeks. Jonathan continued his courtship with the same careful respect, never pushing beyond the boundaries they'd established, but making his desire clear in the way his eyes followed her, in the barely restrained passion of their kisses, in the husky tone his voice took when they were alone. The night before the wedding, as Emily sat in her room surrounded by the life she was leaving behind, Charlotte knocked softly. "May I come in?" Emily nodded, making space on the bed. Charlotte settled beside her, taking her hand. "Are you frightened?" Charlotte asked gently. "No." Emily was surprised to realize it was true. "I'm excited. Nervous, yes, but not frightened. Jonathan has shown me who he is, Charlotte. I know he'll be gentle, patient. I trust him." "Papa would be so happy," Charlotte said, tears shining in her eyes. "He always wanted you to find someone who saw your worth, someone who wouldn't try to diminish you." "He would have liked Jonathan," Emily agreed, her own tears threatening. They would have spent hours discussing railway expansion and business strategy. The sisters held each other, crying and laughing simultaneously, until Beatrice joined them, and the three collapsed into a tangle of embraces and shared memories. "Promise you'll still be our sister," Beatrice said fiercely, "even when you're a duchess." "Always," Emily vowed. "Nothing changes that. Not titles, not distance, not anything." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, autumn sun streaming through Emily's windows like a benediction. Her wedding gown was ivory silk, elegant without ostentation, chosen to reflect both her mourning period's end and her new beginning. Charlotte and Beatrice helped her dress, their hands steady where hers trembled with anticipation. When Emily finally looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Not because she looked different, but because she looked happy, genuinely, radiantly happy in a way she hadn't been since before her father's death. The church was full when she arrived. It seemed half of London had come to witness the Duke of Rothshire's marriage, but Emily saw only Jonathan, standing at the altar in formal dress, his amber eyes finding hers across the distance. She walked down the aisle alone, a choice that had scandalized some but felt right to Emily. No one was giving her away. She was choosing this, choosing him, of her own free will and with full understanding of what she was doing. When she reached Jonathan's side, he took her hand, and she felt the slight tremor in his fingers that matched her own. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "You're late," she replied, though he wasn't. "I've been waiting my whole life for this." His smile was everything she'd ever wanted to see: love, desire, promise, and above all, recognition. He saw her completely and loved what he saw. The ceremony passed in a blur of sacred words and solemn vows. Emily spoke her promises clearly, her voice steady with conviction. Jonathan's voice roughened with emotion when he pledged his love and faithfulness. And when the vicar finally pronounced them husband and wife, when Jonathan lifted her veil and kissed her before God and all of London society, Emily felt the last piece of herself click into place. She was no longer just Emily Winters, the capable daughter managing her father's legacy. She was Emily Ashworth, Duchess of Rothshire, a woman who had found the courage to want something for herself and the strength to claim it. As they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, Emily caught her sister's eyes. Charlotte was crying openly. Beatrice was grinning through her tears, and Emily felt her own tears fall, not from sadness, but from joy so complete it couldn't be contained. She had been so afraid of losing herself in marriage, but standing beside Jonathan, their fingers intertwined, she realized the truth. She hadn't lost herself at all. She had finally, fully become herself, strong enough to be vulnerable, brave enough to love, whole enough to share that wholeness with someone who treasured it. The reception at Rothschild House was elegant and overwhelming. Emily danced with Jonathan for the first waltz, finally accepting the dance she had once refused, and felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. "Happy?" he murmured against her ear. "Terrified," she admitted. "Excited. In love. All of it at once." "Good," Jonathan said, spinning her gently, "because in a few hours we'll be alone, truly alone. And Emily, I intend to show you exactly how much I love you." His words sent heat flooding through her body. She looked up at him, seeing desire banked but clearly burning in his eyes, and felt answering desire kindle in her own chest. "I'm counting on it," she whispered, and felt him stumble slightly in the dance. His laugh was low and full of promise. 6 more hours of this reception. I don't know if I can wait that long." "Then we'll wait together," Emily said softly, "just as we'll face everything else together." And looking into his eyes, feeling the solid warmth of his hand on her waist, Emily knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. Not the safe choice, but the brave one. The choice that led to life rather than mere existence. 6 weeks ago, she had been terrified of falling in love. Now standing in her husband's arms, Emily understood that falling had been necessary, because only in falling had she learned to fly. The journey to Jonathan's country estate took 3 hours, the carriage rattling over country roads as twilight deepened into full darkness. Emily sat beside her husband. The word still felt new and strange, acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched. His hand rested over hers on the seat between them, his thumb tracing absent circles on her palm that sent shivers of awareness through her entire body. "Nervous?" Jonathan asked quietly. "Yes," Emily admitted, grateful for the darkness that hid the color in her cheeks. "And no. Is that strange?" "Not at all." His voice was warm with understanding. "I'm nervous too, if it helps." She turned to look at him, surprised. "You are?" "Emily, I've waited my entire life for something real. For someone real. Now that I have you, I'm terrified of doing anything that might hurt or disappoint you." The vulnerability in his admission made her heart ache with tenderness. She turned her hand beneath his, interlacing their fingers properly. "You won't," she said softly. "Jonathan, I trust you. Completely." His grip tightened briefly. "That trust is the most precious thing anyone has ever given me. I swear I won't betray it." When they finally arrived at Ashworth Manor, Emily was struck by the beauty of the place. Moonlight silvered the stone facade, and lights glowed warmly in dozens of windows. The staff had lined up to greet their new Duchess, and Emily moved through the introductions with what she hoped was appropriate grace, though her mind was already racing ahead to what came next. Mrs. Peters, the housekeeper, showed them to their private wing, adjoining bedrooms with a connecting door as was traditional. But Emily noticed Jonathan's eyes lingering on that door, his expression holding the same mixture of anticipation and restraint she felt coiling in her own chest. "I'll leave you to refresh yourself," Mrs. Peters said kindly, clearly sensing the tension. "Shall I send up a tray? You barely ate at the reception." Emily hadn't even noticed. "That would be lovely, thank you." Alone in what was now her bedroom, Emily let herself breathe fully for the first time in hours. A fire crackled in the hearth, and her trunks had already been unpacked. A silk nightgown lay across the bed, pale ivory, clearly chosen by Charlotte or Beatrice for this night. The sight of it made her pulse quicken. A maid arrived to help her undress and prepare for bed, working with efficient silence. When Emily was finally alone again, wearing the silk nightgown with a matching robe, she studied herself in the mirror. Her auburn hair fell loose around her shoulders. The silk draped her figure in a way that was both modest and revealing, showing the shape of her body beneath. She looked like a woman on her wedding night. She felt like someone balanced on the edge of something momentous and terrifying and wonderful, all at once. A soft knock came at the connecting door. "Emily, may I come in?" She crossed to open it, her heart hammering. Jonathan stood in the doorway, also in nightclothes, dark trousers and a white shirt open at the collar, showing the hollow of his throat. His eyes widened as he took in her appearance, and she saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. "You're so beautiful," he said roughly. "Emily, you take my breath away." "So do you," she whispered, and saw surprise flicker across his features as if no one had ever told him such a thing before. He stepped into the room slowly, giving her space to retreat if she wished. But Emily didn't move, couldn't move. Her entire being felt focused on this moment, on the man approaching her with such careful reverence. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for," Jonathan said, when he stood before her. "I know this is all new and I want you to feel safe." "Jonathan." Emily reached up, placing her fingers gently against his lips. "I love you. I trust you. And I want this. I want you." His eyes darkened with desire, no longer carefully banked. "Emily." "Show me," she whispered. "Show me what it means to be loved by you." Jonathan's hands came up to frame her face, his touch achingly gentle. "Are you certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Emily felt herself melting into him. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer, and she gasped at the feeling of his body against hers with so little between them. "Tell me if I do anything you don't like," he murmured against her lips. "Promise me, Emily." "I promise." His fingers found the tie of her robe, hesitating for just a moment before loosening it. The silk whispered as it fell away, leaving only the thin nightgown. Jonathan's hands skimmed up her sides, his touch reverent, almost worshipful. "You're trembling," he said softly. "So are you." He laughed quietly, the sound rough with emotion. "Because you undo me, Emily. Every defense, every wall I've ever built, you destroy them all just by existing." She reached for the buttons of his shirt, her fingers clumsy but determined. He stood still, letting her work, his breathing growing faster as she revealed more of his chest. When she spread the fabric open, she placed her palm over his heart, feeling it thunder beneath her touch. "I'm yours," he said simply. "Every part of me, Emily. Yours." "And I'm yours," she replied, looking up into his amber eyes. "Show me what that means." Jonathan's control seemed to crack then. He swept her into his arms, carrying her to the bed with a gentleness that contrasted with the intensity in his eyes. He laid her down on the soft coverlet, following her down, his body covering hers but careful not to crush her with his weight. "I love you," he murmured, punctuating each word with kisses, her lips, her jaw, the sensitive spot beneath her ear that made her gasp. "I love your mind, your strength, your courage. I love the way you challenge me, the way you see through every pretense. I love everything you are, Emily." His hands moved over her body with increasing confidence, learning what made her sigh, what made her arch into his touch. Emily's own hands explored him in turn, marveling at the solid strength of him, the warmth of his skin, the way his breath hitched when her fingers traced certain paths. "Jonathan," she breathed, not sure what she was asking for, but knowing she needed more. "I know," he said against her throat. "I know, love. Let me take care of you." His fingers found the hem of her nightgown, and she lifted her hips to help him remove it. For a moment she felt vulnerable, exposed, but the look in Jonathan's eyes, pure reverence mixed with fierce desire, banished any uncertainty. "Perfect," he breathed. "You're perfect, Emily." His clothes followed, and then there was nothing between them but skin and breath, and the most profound intimacy Emily had ever known. Jonathan moved with exquisite care, constantly watching her face, reading her reactions. "Does this hurt?" he asked when she tensed. "A little," she admitted, "but don't stop. Please don't stop." "Never," he promised, kissing her deeply as he moved within her. "Never, Emily. I'll never stop loving you, wanting you, choosing you." The initial discomfort faded, replaced by something deeper, more profound. Emily clung to Jonathan, her fingers digging into his shoulders as sensation built and spiraled within her. She felt herself dissolving and reforming simultaneously, breaking apart only to be made whole again in his arms. When release came, it was like falling and flying at once, terrifying and transcendent, utterly unlike anything she had imagined. She cried out his name and felt him follow her over that precipice, his own voice breaking on her name like a prayer. Afterward, they lay tangled together, breathing hard, hearts racing in tandem. Jonathan pulled the coverlet over them and gathered Emily close, pressing kisses to her hair, her temple, anywhere he could reach. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Emily nestled closer, feeling utterly safe despite the magnitude of what had just passed between them. "More than all right. I feel complete." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." His arms tightened around her. "Because that's exactly how I feel. Like I've been incomplete my entire life, and only now with you am I whole." They lay in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling softly, moonlight streaming through the windows. Emily traced idle patterns on Jonathan's chest, marveling at this new intimacy, this profound knowledge of another person. "What are you thinking?" Jonathan asked, his voice drowsy and content. "That I'm glad I refused you that first night," Emily said, surprising herself. He laughed, a deep rumble she felt through his chest. "Are you now?" "Yes. Because if I had said yes then, it would have been just another dance. But by saying no, I made you see me. Really see me. And that led to all of this, to us, to this moment, to a love I never imagined possible." Jonathan shifted to look down at her, his eyes serious despite his smile. "Emily Ashworth, you are the wisest woman I've ever known, and I intend to spend the rest of my life proving I deserve you." "You already do," she said softly. "By seeing me, by respecting me, by loving all of me, not just the parts that are convenient." He kissed her again, slowly and thoroughly, and Emily felt desire stirring anew. Jonathan seemed to sense it too, because his hands began wandering again, relearning the geography of her body with deliberate intent. "Again," she whispered, surprised by her own eagerness. "Again," he confirmed, his voice rich with promise. "And again. I have a lifetime to love you, Emily, and I intend to make use of every moment." This time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. Emily met him as an equal partner in their intimacy, giving and taking in turn, learning the language of pleasure that needed no words. And when they finally slept, tangled together as dawn began to lighten the sky, Emily knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. She had found not just a husband, but a true partner. Someone who saw her completely and loved what he saw. Someone who made her stronger by allowing her to be vulnerable. Someone who transformed falling in love from terrifying surrender into triumphant flight. The future stretched ahead, full of challenges and possibilities. There would be difficulties, certainly. Society would not easily accept a duchess who involved herself in business matters. But with Jonathan beside her, Emily felt ready to face anything. Because love, real love, didn't diminish strength, it multiplied it. And together they were unstoppable. 2 years later, Emily stood at the window of Jonathan's, their study at Ashworth Manor, watching autumn sunlight paint the gardens in shades of gold and amber. Her hand rested on the gentle swell of her belly, where their first child grew, and she felt a contentment so profound it still surprised her sometimes. Behind her she heard Jonathan's footsteps, then felt his arms circle her waist, his hands coming to rest over hers. "Wool gathering again, Duchess?" he murmured against her ear. "Reflecting," she corrected, leaning back into his warmth. "On how much has changed in 2 years?" "Everything has changed," Jonathan said softly. "And nothing has changed. You're still the most brilliant, stubborn, extraordinary woman I've ever known." Emily smiled, turning in his arms to face him. "And you're still the man who sees me, who chose me when I was too frightened to choose myself." The past 2 years had been transformative beyond anything Emily could have imagined. The railway coalition she'd formed had flourished, expanding service to smaller communities throughout northern England. More significantly, 3 other women had approached her, wives and daughters of investors who possessed their own business acumen but lacked any platform to use it. Together they had formed an unofficial advisory group, providing analyses and recommendations that increasingly shaped major business decisions. Society had been scandalized, of course, but Jonathan's unwavering support had made all the difference. When Lord Pemberton had questioned Emily's presence at an investors' meeting, Jonathan's response had been swift and unequivocal. "My wife possesses more strategic insight than any man in this room. Any of you are welcome to challenge her conclusions, but you'll do so respectfully. or you'll find your capital no longer welcome in ventures I support." No one had challenged her after that. "The solicitor's messenger arrived this morning," Jonathan said now, his expression turning more serious. "The papers are finalized. The trust for our daughter or son is established exactly as we discussed." "Equal education regardless of gender," Emily recited, having memorized every clause. "Equal access to family business decisions upon reaching maturity. Protection from fortune hunters or abusive spouses." "Everything you never had," Jonathan finished. "Everything our children will have, because their mother fought to change the world they'll inherit." Emily felt tears prick her eyes. Pregnancy had made her more emotional, but this was more than hormones. This was the realization that her father's dream, of a world where capability mattered more than gender, was slowly, incrementally becoming reality. "He would be proud," she whispered. "Papa. He would be so proud." "He would be insufferable about it," Jonathan corrected with a gentle smile, "constantly reminding me how fortunate I am to have married his brilliant daughter." "You are fortunate," Emily said, managing to inject some levity into her tone. "Unbelievably so." Jonathan's hands moved to cup her face, thumbs brushing away the tears that had spilled over. "Emily, do you remember what you said to me on our wedding night? About being glad you refused me that first time?" "I remember everything about our wedding night," she said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks even after 2 years of marriage. His eyes darkened with familiar desire. "As do I. But what you said about refusal leading to us truly seeing each other, that stayed with me. Because you were right. If you had said yes that night, I would have danced with you and moved on. But your no made me stop and actually look. It changed everything." "Where is this reflection leading?" Emily asked, sensing something beneath his words. Jonathan took her hand and led her to the desk, where a leather portfolio lay waiting. "I've been working on something, with Blackwood's help, though the ideas are largely mine." Emily opened the portfolio and began reading. Her eyes widened as she absorbed the contents. A proposal for a formal education trust, designed to provide scholarships for young women interested in commerce, engineering, and other fields traditionally closed to them. "Jonathan," she breathed, this would change everything for so many women." "That's the idea." His expression was earnest, vulnerable in the way he only allowed himself to be with her. "I can't change the laws, Emily. Not yet. Not alone. But I can use my influence and resources to create opportunities, to prove that educating women in these fields benefits everyone." She looked up at him, overwhelmed by love so fierce it took her breath away. "You're doing this for me." "I'm doing it for us," he corrected. "For our daughter, if we have one. For every brilliant woman who's been told her mind doesn't matter. But yes, Emily, you inspired it. You inspire everything good I do." Emily set down the papers and pulled him into a kiss that conveyed everything words couldn't capture. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes. What if something happens? What if—" "Then we'll face it together," Jonathan interrupted gently. "Emily, I can't promise we'll never face hardship, but I can promise you'll never face anything alone. Not as long as I draw breath." A knock at the door interrupted them. Matthews, the butler, appeared with his usual perfect timing. "Pardon the interruption, Your Graces, but Miss Charlotte and Miss Beatrice have arrived. They're waiting in the drawing room." Emily's face lit up. Her sisters visited frequently. Charlotte was now engaged to a kind young scholar, while Beatrice had shocked everyone by announcing her intention to study mathematics at university, made possible by Jonathan's educational trust. "Tell them we'll be right there," Jonathan said. But before they left the study, Emily caught his hand once more. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. For seeing me, for believing in me, for building a future where our children and other women's children will have chances we never had." "Thank you for being brave enough to refuse me," Jonathan replied with that familiar warmth in his eyes. "And even braver when you chose to accept." 3 years later, the garden at Ashworth Manor had never looked more beautiful. Late summer roses bloomed in profusion, and the ancient oaks provided dappled shade for the small gathering. celebrating their daughter Eleanor's 3rd birthday. Emily watched Jonathan with their daughter, a bright, curious child with her mother's intelligence and her father's charm. He was teaching her to identify different flowers, and Eleanor was absorbing every word with the kind of focused attention that made Emily's heart swell with pride and hope. "She's going to be formidable," Charlotte observed, settling onto the bench beside Emily. Her own daughter, barely 6 months old, slept peacefully in her arms. "Terrifying," Emily agreed with a smile. "She already asks more questions than I can answer, and Jonathan encourages it shamelessly. As he should." Beatrice approached with glasses of lemonade, her university books never far from reach even at family gatherings. "The world needs more women who ask difficult questions." Emily looked at her sisters, Charlotte happily married to a man who valued her kindness and creativity, Beatrice pursuing an education that would have been unthinkable just 5 years ago, and felt something close to triumph. Their father had planted seeds of possibility. Jonathan had helped them grow, and together they were cultivating a garden where women's potential could finally flourish. "Emily!" Eleanor's voice rang out across the garden. "Come see. Papa says this is your favorite flower." Emily rose, her hand instinctively going to her belly, where a second child had just begun to make its presence known. She hadn't told Jonathan yet. That announcement would wait until tonight, when they were alone and she could see his face light up with that mixture of joy and wonder that still made her heart race. As she crossed the garden toward her husband and daughter, Emily thought about that night at the ball 3 years ago. The night she had refused a duke's invitation to dance. The night everything had changed. She had been so afraid then, of vulnerability, of need, of losing herself in loving someone. But Jonathan had shown her a different truth, that the right person didn't diminish you. They illuminated you. They made you more yourself, not less. "Mama's here," Jonathan said as she approached, and Eleanor launched herself into Emily's arms with the absolute trust only children possess. "Papa says when I'm bigger I can help with the railway papers," Eleanor announced importantly, "and that being a duchess doesn't mean I have to be boring." Emily laughed, meeting Jonathan's eyes over their daughter's head. "Your papa is very wise." "Occasionally," he agreed, his smile intimate and warm. "Though I still make mistakes. Your mother has to correct me regularly." "That's what mamas do," Eleanor said with a child's perfect logic. "They make everything better." As the afternoon stretched into evening, as laughter filled the garden and family surrounded them, Emily felt the profound rightness of this life they had built. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. There were still battles to fight, prejudices to overcome, moments when the weight of expectations threatened to crush her. But she didn't face any of it alone. She had Jonathan, who saw her completely and loved what he saw. She had her sisters, who reminded her where she came from. She had Eleanor, who represented everything they were fighting to build. And soon she would have another child to raise in a world slowly, incrementally becoming more just. "What are you thinking?" Jonathan asked quietly, coming to stand beside her as the sun began its descent. "That I'm grateful," Emily said simply, "for refusing you that first night, for saying yes when it mattered, for every moment that led us here, even the difficult ones, especially those." She turned to face him fully. "The difficult moments taught us we could weather anything together. That love isn't just joy, it's choosing each other again and again, especially when it's hard." Jonathan's arms came around her, careful of her still flat belly, and Emily rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I have something to tell you," she murmured. "I'm listening." "Eleanor is going to be a big sister." She felt him go still. Then his arms tightened around her. When he pulled back to look at her face, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Emily," he whispered. "Truly, truly. Are you pleased?" "Pleased." His laugh was unsteady, overwhelmed. "Emily, you've given me everything I never knew I wanted. A partner, a family, a life that feels real instead of performed. How could I be anything but overjoyed?" He kissed her there in the garden, surrounded by roses and gathering twilight, and Emily felt the truth settle into her bones. This was what happiness looked like. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real and earned and infinitely precious. She had been Emily Winters, the woman who dared to say no. Then Emily Ashworth, the Duchess who refused to be diminished. Now she was simply Emily, wife, mother, partner herself, building a future where every woman might one day have the courage to refuse what diminished her and claim what made her whole. And it had all begun with a single word: no. Sometimes, Emily thought, as Jonathan's hand found hers and their daughter's laughter rang out across the garden, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse what everyone expects, because only then do you create space for what you truly deserve. Emily and Jonathan's story reminds us that true love doesn't ask us to be smaller. It invites us to be fully, courageously ourselves. That saying no to what's wrong can open the door to everything that's right, and that the greatest partnerships are built not on perfection, but on two people brave enough to see each other clearly and choose each other anyway. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like. It helps these tales of courage and love reach others who need them. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of brave hearts and forbidden romance. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop your city and country in the comments. There's something magical about knowing these stories connect us across continents and cultures. Thank you for being here. Until the next story, may you have the courage to refuse what diminishes you and claim what makes you whole.